Hi, everyone. So, we just wanted to take a few minutes this afternoon to walk you through a case study that we have put together on a tool called Omni. Now, if you're not familiar with Omni, what it is a data visualization software put together by a team of former Looker developers. So, it has a lot of the bells and whistles and features that make Looker so great, but they also built it and designed it from the ground up with the end user in mind. And what I mean by that, and what you'll see here, is that it's very intuitive. The modeling layer is something really that anyone can pick up, regardless of your proficiency or prior background in analytics or SQL or data engineering. And they also are constantly adding new features that are pushing the envelope in terms of what's being done in the data viz space. And just to give you a little teaser on that, the two things that really excite me the most are their spreadsheets feature as well as their AI capabilities. So, just to take a step back, the thought process here, as far as what we're putting together, Nick and I have both spent a lot of time in past lives working in finance and with financial institutions of various size. And one of the problems that you have to solve for if you've ever been an analyst is how do I stitch together and make sense of the financials when I'm looking at a firm that's essentially an aggregate of a bunch of different portfolio companies that roll up into that broader private equity firm or whatever type of organization that it might be. So you have your big kind of broader private equity company umbrella, and then you have a bunch of portcos that sort of sit underneath there. And in the past, a lot of this work as the analyst might fall on someone like me to download those financials individually, set up a bunch of tabs in Excel, stitch things together, do a lot of manual ticking and tying, and it's a nightmare. The good news is that a lot of PE firms have gotten smart about this and have started to invest in data analytics resources to automate a lot of these processes and build these types of dashboards in-house. But where I think they still miss the mark a lot of the time, and not to name any names in terms of tools, but employing softwares that aren't necessarily designed with a financial institution in mind, you tend to have to hack things together, right? If you want to show a P&L, you have to use a lot of creative solutions to get things to format and display in the right way. Where Omni is great is due to that spreadsheets feature that I mentioned, due to their kind of intuitive model layer, it makes it a lot easier to do that kind of roll-up work and roll-up analysis, and even have things like financial models or full kind of like P&Ls built into the tool itself that are directly connected to your data warehouse, which you can filter live and in real time without having to worry about downloading, recutting, repasting all of that data manually by hand, which certainly is something that I've spent quite a few hours doing in past roles. So anyway, let's dive in. The firm here, as we've named it, is Shoreside Capital. You could probably guess why. And on the front, you'll see basically we have this organized with, this is the portfolio overview tab we're looking at here. And then we also have a financial statements tab, which we'll switch to in a second. But on the overview tab, think of this as a place where we would just want to report the consolidated metrics for the firm as a whole. So within Shoreside Capital, we have three different companies that we've built out the financials for. The back end, FitGen Health, Packet, and SkyScreen Solutions. If you're interested in learning more about kind of these hypothetical companies, you can read a little bit about them here. But at the company level, we have all of this right now aggregated. You have the ability to filter, and I'll show you more how this works in a second, to any of these individual companies, as well as across industry or region, city, and of course, date. So as we scroll down here, you can see just some of the high-level metrics that a PE firm, partner at a private equity firm, whoever it might be, might care about. What's our revenue? What's the OpEx look like? What is COGS, EBITDA, budget variance, all that kind of stuff. And as we keep moving, we can actually follow some trends. So how is EBITDA trending over time, and is it or is it not in line with the budget? And we can see for the most part, as a firm, we've been doing pretty well compared to the budget. We can go even further and we can do some comparative analyses, right? So once again, we have these high-level summary metrics, but then we can say within each of these portcos, how do they stack up to one another, both in terms of just gross dollar revenue comparisons, as well as profit margins, EBITDA margins, and just EBITDA dollars. As we scroll further, we can do things like break out revenue by subcategories, break out OpEx by subcategories. So we could say maybe there's a target around what digital marketing spend should be as a percent of OpEx, and are we hitting that or are we not? Same thing with COGS, comparing overall performance versus budget. You can get as creative with this as you want, but the point is that instead of this being like a static slide or something that's living in a PowerPoint, this is all dynamic and directly connected to the database. So when I go up top and I'll show you this in a second, and I make changes maybe to the date filters or to the companies that we're looking at, this is going to happen like that instead of having to send a request to an analyst or an associate, wait for them to turn, check, be concerned if the numbers are correct, if things are ticking and tying. As long as you've built your logic out well in the back end, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So last thing I'll just show you here quick is we built out just a pretty basic actual versus budget variance summary. So you're probably familiar seeing something like this, right? We have all our different expense line items. How do they compare to what the budget was? We can obviously color code those like you might see in an Excel sheet, and just in a kind of real time, more or less, give you a read on what performance looks like. So if I were to come up top here, let's say we're really interested in seeing, okay, what is performance like over the last 30 days instead of 365, right? We can change that. We can give it just a few seconds to flow through here. And as you'll see, all of these numbers are going to refresh. And now we can come down and we can get a read. Of course, the trends are going to make a little bit less sense, but we can get a read on, all right, so over the last 30 days, how are these individual portcos actually comparing to one another? Same thing with the differences in how the various categories break down, as well as comparisons to actual versus budget. You can do the same thing by selecting a couple companies. So maybe we specifically are having a conversation about what does the business look like if we were to roll off Packet and SkyScreen solutions. And so we can say our potential acquirers are interested in performance over the last 30 days for these two aspects of the firm specifically. We can filter that way, and we can tell this in, again, pretty much real time. Maybe we just want to know how things are doing in Cleveland. No problem. So we can get a read on that basically as quick as we can ask the question. The next piece that I want to show you here is something that, again, as a former investment banking analyst, someone who spent a lot of my career in sheets, that I'm really excited about. And this is the spreadsheets functionality within Omni. So if I go over to our financial statements tab, what you'll see is I've set up here just a basic date filter and comparison, right? So I can select the period that I want. For now, it's at the month, compare it to the previous year. So basically same month, prior year. But I also have a filter here for what the company name is. So from there, what I can do is, just like I would build something out in Excel, is build out a spreadsheet that shows whatever it is that I am interested in seeing. In this case, all my various different line items, how they roll up into sort of summary totals and subtotals, how those compare to budget in terms of dollar variance and percent variance, how that compares year versus the prior year. And all of that is laid out again and directly connected to the database. And why that's so powerful is, now let's say what I actually want to see is prior, let's call it 3-month data, okay? And I want to compare it to the previous period, so the previous 3 months iteration. So I'll just get rid of the previous year filter here, and I'll select previous period. And what we can basically do then, again, in more or less real time, is have a comparison that's showing that specific range of dates that I'm concerned about, and see how that spits out in terms of what that P&L looks like. So instead, again, of having to recut this and repaste it and play with the data in an Excel sheet, I can just do this basically, again, as quick as I can pretty much ask the question. And I can have this date filter function essentially however I want. And so beyond that, again, let's stay with the same sort of scenario we had talked about. If I want to know how two specific aspects of the business look, how they've been performing, if we were to carve those out, I can select those, and I can get a pretty quick read on how these financials break down over the period in question for those two aspects of the business. All right, so we can see, what does the revenue look like, what does the COGS look like, operating expenses, EBITDA, all that good stuff. So the last thing I'd like to show you here is the fact that not only can you build a P&L inside of this tool, but you can actually build yourself a fully functional model, whatever that might be, again, that is directly connected to your database. So here, for the sake of example, I have a discounted cash flow model, and you can see I've taken sort of our EBITDA projections, walked that all the way down to unlevered free cash flow, applied the discount rate, perpetual growth rate to get us to eventually our enterprise value and what that looks like in terms of EV per share. So what makes this so exciting, again, for me as a former analyst, is you can imagine how this would expand from here, right? All the different filters that you could have applied. and it's directly connected to this live view and again to the database. So if we're specifically interested in seeing, okay, I really only want to know what sort of the DCF, the enterprise value is for SkyScreen Solutions, because that's the component of the business that we're thinking about carving out, I can apply that filter, and that's going to flow through the back end, and you can see like the enterprise value of that business specifically is 180 million, which is different than the 500-ish for all three components together. And now, of course, you might ask yourself, what if I want to change the assumptions? What if I'd like to edit how the model itself looks or works or any of that stuff? And so I can give you a quick walkthrough of how this actually functions within the workbook itself. So once we click edit, we hop into this workbook view. And you'll see where I've set this up, right? So I come into my summary P&L and I'll hit edit here. The way that this looks is very similar to what you would likely used to seeing in Excel or in Google Sheets. So I have my formulas set up like sum ifs. I have index matches in some places. I have some functions. I have it formatted just the way that I would format this if I was building a P&L that I was going to hand over to my MD or someone else, right? So same thing on the DCF side. You can see here. So here's where I have my inputs. So if I want to change what our sort of discount rate is applied here, I can do that really quickly. Obviously, I can change my perpetual growth rate, and that's going to flow through all the way down to the bottom, just again, like any other model would, right? So we can see this stuff is kind of updating in real time, and it's changing what my enterprise value actually is. And again, you can see I have this pulling in as index match functions. And just to show you this real quick, what we have essentially set up is we have queries here that are referencing, again, the raw data. And then we have the live sheet, which is just pulling in a reference to those queries themselves and then building it into this model. So it really is very straightforward and it's extremely powerful. It's the kind of thing that you can start small and take it wherever you might imagine, get eventually to a point where you might have your full three-statement models living directly within this Omni tool. And if your partner were to come to you and say, I want to look at this in a 3-year discounted cash flow view, I want to specifically carve out one component of the business, what does that tell me in terms of enterprise value? You can do that in real time. And if stuff changes in the back end, as far as, let's say, that projections update, as long as you have the connection set up well to your database, that's going to flow into your data warehouse. That's going to flow into your dashboard visualization tool, and everything is going to be in sync in more or less real time. So I hope you enjoyed our walkthrough of Omni. In our next series of videos, we're going to take a moment to just walk you through the back end in a little more detail, show you some of the aspects of how these queries are put together, why we think that the data modeling here is a lot more straightforward than in some other tools, including how you can use Excel-like functions to calculate values pretty darn quickly. And then we're also going to give you a preview or a little bit more detail on how the AI functionality works and how you can employ that for your business and really enable your end users regardless of their technical skill. So I hope you found that interesting, whether you're a private equity firm or a business that's a portfolio company or a completely independent operation. If you're interested in learning more about how we can implement Omni and the ways that it can help you grow your organization, please feel free to reach out. You can drop a question in the comments. You can reach out to us on our LinkedIn or our emails, which you can find in various different places. But yeah, appreciate you sticking with us. Talk again soon.